Hi, my name is Dr. Carrie Dyer, and I am the school counselor at Pleasant Hill Elementary. Here's a little information about our zones implementation. So in 2019, 2020, this was our initial implementation year. Our goal was to utilize a curriculum that we could use school-wide so that our students would get used to using the same vocabulary, ultimately with the goal of learning how to self-regulate and being able to work on sharing their feelings and being able to express themselves in a positive way. So when we initially began our implementation, we did an overview and then we scheduled times to work with teachers to teach them how to teach the lessons. Because even though the zones of regulation was designed by an occupational therapist and it was actually written for teachers, they needed a little bit of support because it is new. During 2019-2020, approximately 70% of the book was covered, and we really felt it was more of an overview, and obviously COVID had something to do with that as well. So for this school year, we gave yet another overview given, and then chapters were assigned to teachers, basically saying, complete so many chapters by this date. Teachers were also given the option to have co-teaching with myself and have any resources that they needed if they asked. And one of their biggest resources was continuing to buy more books. And we have bought more books through the use of Title I funds. And our goal, hopefully by the end of the year, was also purchase enough books for every single staff member to have one in the building. We also in 2021 just recently began a shift from utilizing just the zones, books, and guidance lessons and within the classroom to I started providing mini lessons through video that teachers can access through my Google Drive as well as our students can access through Canvas. So when we look at the data, before we began zones in 2018, 2019, we had approximately 23 suspensions. Our first year of zones, we had 16 individual suspensions, and currently this year we have had no suspensions. The same trend we have seen when we look at our behavior log in PowerSchool. We had about most of our logs in 2018, 2019 were dealing with behavior. And then as we've gone from 2019 to 2020, that number has steadily decreased to our current school year. So when we have teachers logging, it does not appear that most of them have to do with behavior. Here are some examples of how some of our staff use zones. This the upper left-hand corner is a lower grade example of a morning zones check-in, while down at the bottom is an upper grades example of a morning zones check-in. And the majority of our classrooms have chosen this and use these methods to check in on their students when they first come in for the day. And so by the time they go to the next grade level, they're totally used to checking in. We also have classes that have calming corners that use zones for references, and we have other grade levels that also have different depictions and posters that they can use for reference. In other areas, as I said, we have started a mini zone lesson, and I provide those for the different chapters, and we have teachers working to even more incorporate zones into their regular curriculum versus doing a zones lesson and then incorporating curriculum into that. They are kind of working backwards and trying to provide a whole encompassing look in both curriculum and zones. So here is an example of a mini lesson I did a few weeks ago. Hi guys. So this week we've been talking about regulation techniques. And remember, regulation techniques are things that we can do when we find that we are moving away from that green zone into the yellow zone, the blue zone, or the red zone. And we really want to get back to the green zone. Now, the awesome thing about regulation techniques is there's lots out there. There's way more than what I gave you. And the other awesome thing about it is just because they work for you now doesn't mean they will always. And so there's always more to find. But the other great thing is don't get discouraged. If one does not work for you, but maybe works for your friend, that's great. There's one that's going to work for you. And believe me, sometimes when we're trying to work on regulating ourselves and moving back to green, they may not work in the moment. It doesn't work for me all the time either. So sometimes I have to try several, and that's okay. So really quick, I'm going to go over two things. And teachers, this is roughly on page 127 in the Zones book. I'm going to talk about what's called your inner coach, and your inner critic. And if you notice by my face, they're kind of two different types. And when we talk about your inner coach versus your inner critic, these are things that are happening in our brains. So earlier this week, one of the things I talked about was positive self-talk. And positive just means um, happy, good, encouraging. So your inner coach is that what we call what adults would call positive self-talk. So your inner critic is that little voice inside your head that tries to keep you in those other zones, like the blue zone or the yellow zone or the red zone. And a lot of times, if we start listening to that inner critic or that negative voice, that not so nice voice that reminds us of all those negative or not great things, you're going to stay in those zones. And so our students have been enjoying that, and our teachers have access to that, as I said, in our drive, and then our students have access to those zones in Canvas. And so far, we have really enjoyed seeing the positive reactions from students and the increase in vocabulary and the increase in willingness to share by implementing the zones of regulation in our school.